Okay, take your seats. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Actually, it's not afternoon yet. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Today we're starting the briefing a little bit early because we are joined by a very special guest, Nicholas Haysom, the Special Representative of the Secretary General for South Sudan and head of the UN mission in South Sudan, UNMISS. And so he's joining us virtually from South Sudan to brief on the situation in the country. And I see him on the screen there. Mr. Haysom, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Farah. But thank you generally for the opportunity to update on the dire situation unfolding in South Sudan. We are finding it difficult to get the bandwidth for the media generally to take note of what is happening in what seems to be yet another war. As you're aware, the political and security situation has significantly deteriorated since the White Army, that's the youth militia, overran barracks previously occupied by the South Sudan People's Defense Forces in Nasir on the 4th of March. In retaliation, communities across Upper Nile are being subjected to persistent aerial bombardment using devices, barrel bombs, allegedly containing a highly flammable liquid that acts as an accelerant on explosion. These indiscriminate attacks on civilians are causing significant casualties and horrific injuries, especially burns, including to women and children. Our humanitarian partners assess that at least 63,000 people have fled the area. We're receiving reports of further mobilization of White Army and SSPDF forces in Upper Nile, allegedly including children forcibly recruited into the ranks of the respective armed formations. This, in addition to the deployment of foreign forces at the request of the South Sudan government, is fueling further fear and anxiety across the country, which in its experience is finding this reminiscent of the conflict to the civil war in 2013, the first of the civil wars that the country has experienced since its independence in 2011. On the political front, some senior military and civilian officials affiliated with the Sudan People's Liberation Movement in opposition have been replaced or removed from their official positions, while others have been detained, gone into hiding, or fled the country. Rampant misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech is also ratcheting up tensions and driving ethnic divisions and fear. Given this grim situation, we are left with no other conclusion but to assess that South Sudan is on the edge of a relapse into civil war. To try and prevent this outcome, UNMISS is engaging in intense shuttle diplomacy alongside international and regional peace partners, including the African Union, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, and the reconstituted Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission, RJMAC. This quartet held an urgent meeting today to explore further steps that can be taken to convince the parties to pull back from the brink. The region and the international community have also been actively engaged. As you know, the Security Council and the African Union Peace and Security Council both met last week. Earlier, IGAD met at the heads of state, the summit level, and decided to dispatch a ministerial subcommittee to Juba to mediate and lend support to the parties to return to the revitalized peace agreement. Unfortunately, a high-level visit by IGAD foreign ministers to Juba was today postponed to the 3rd of April by the government at the last minute and without explanation. This is a disappointing development at a time when diplomatic outreach is more important than ever. The efforts of the international community to broker a peaceful solution can only succeed if the parties themselves are willing to engage and put the interests of their people ahead of their own. The alternative is a slide into conflict that would erase all the hard-won gains made since 2018 peace deal was signed. It would devastate not only South Sudan, but the entire region. We simply cannot afford another war. The collective message of the region and the international community is the same. We remain convinced that there is only one way out of the cycle of conflict, and that is to return to the revitalized peace agreement in letter and spirit. This includes strict adherence to the ceasefire, the release of detained officials or their treatment in accordance with legal process, an immediate return to consensus-based decision-making, and the resolution of tensions through dialogue rather than military confrontation. We also encourage the President and First Vice President to meet to resolve their differences constructively, making a joint public statement that reassures all South Sudanese of their united, steadfast commitment to peace. The time for action is now, because the alternative is too terrible to contemplate. I thank you.
Thank you. That's a very sobering briefing. I'll now turn to questions from the press. First, for Edie.
Thank you, Mr. Haysom. So nice to see you. Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association, welcome and thank you for doing this briefing. Basically, you've given a dire warning to the world of a potential revitalization of the civil war in South Sudan. Can you give us a little more background on what touched this off? Is it the break between Salva Kiir and Riek Machar, which seems to have been going on for quite a while now? Why now? Why not 6 months ago or a year ago? And you also talked about foreign forces. Were you talking about mercenaries, or were you talking about forces from other governments? Thank you.
Well, let me take the last question first, Edie. That is that only recently a significant number of Ugandan regular armed forces have entered the country, and they've done so apparently at the request of the South Sudanese government. That is not to say that the country doesn't stand poised to involve other players in the region, and it doesn't have the possibility of drawing in a wide range of players across the Horn of Africa. Why this should erupt now has to do with the escalating tension that we've experienced in South Sudan, particularly as we grow closer to elections and as political competition increases, sharpens between the principal players in a context where they don't seem to be able to display the necessary trust in each other to gamble on peace in a future stable and democratic South Sudan. Most commentators and analysts refer repeatedly to the failure of the two leaders to imbue their own leadership of this transition with the necessary trust which would enable the appropriate levels of leadership to help the country forge an exit from its elaborate transition.
Pam?
Thank you very much, Mr. Haysom. It's Pamela Falk from U.S. News and War Report. Good to see you. The UN Security Council noted the attacks against UNMISS last week. Can you give a little more specific information about the 2 helicopters that were attacked in Upper Nile region? Thank you.
So the mission itself was approached not only by significant players in the region, but by the Red Cross, and asked to assist in diffusing what was the most acute source of tension, such an acute source that it had all the prospects of leading to the conflict which we find ourselves in. And we agreed to assist in defusing the potential conflict by extracting some of the wounded SSPDF soldiers, those who had been in the garrison which had been overrun. We made 3 sorties into the area, that's into Nasir, to uplift injured soldiers. We did in fact uplift 15 and remove them to Malakal. But the principal concern was a general of the SSPDF that all parties agreed should be removed from the scene if the source of the conflict, the real source of antagonism, was to be removed. And it was that general, together with our crew member, that was shot dead on the 3rd of the 3 sorties. In addition, there were 2 crew members who were of ours that were injured. 5 members of the SSPDF, we believe, were killed in the volley of fire which greeted the aircraft when it landed. And the aircraft were able to leave. There were 2 aircraft who participated in the mission. One was partially damaged, the other wasn't. And that's the extent of damage to the helicopters so far. There had been another helicopter, an SSPDF helicopter, that had been downed a few days beforehand.
Yes, Mr. Haysom, Xu Dezhi with China Central Television. With the deterioration of the situation now in South Sudan, how much of an impact would this be for UNMISS, the UN peacekeeping mission in South Sudan? What would be the challenge you are going to face in such circumstances?
Well, we have said consistently that the greatest danger facing South Sudan is a relapse into conflict. A relapse into open war would occasion a conflict of the scale and horror of the conflicts which ravaged the country in 2013 and again in 2016. And it's from that perspective argued that all the parties must do first and foremost whatever they can to restrain to act with restraint, and to encourage Farhan, I don't know quite how to compete with myself on this little.
Sorry, we've had an echo for some. Yeah, there's an echo at the start of people speaking. Are we okay? Okay, we should be okay now.
Okay. I've been sharing with you the messages we have been passing on to our South Sudanese interlocutors and the colleagues and the parties involved in the conflict, that what is required now is restraint and the kinds of conduct which would communicate that same level of restraint to their members. In that way, we have been really copying and replicating the very same messages that significant multilateral organizations have been issuing. You'll know the Security Council met last week, the African Peace and Security Council met last week, the African diplomats in Juba met last week, the Pope is engaged, the Pope himself is engaged, a wide range of leaders from the region, including at head of state level, have sought to contact the parties, but all with the same message. This is an opportunity to pull back from the brink. You have to exercise it now. The country cannot afford another war. We've given them some indications of the steps we think would be helpful, such as the release of detainees who are, in respect of whom there is no information to justify their further detention, a spirit of multilateralism, or should I say, avoiding unilateral actions in the management of the peace process, which has come to characterize some of the recent government interventions. The importance of giving the populace at large a sense of faith, confidence, and trust in the peace agreement itself, and doing by and large whatever is necessary to strengthen the peace agreement, because we believe that's the lifeline, as it were, to stability. If the peace agreement goes down, it's difficult to see how the country can conclude its difficult transition.
Thanks, Farhan. Thank you, Mr. Haysom. This is Gabriel Elizondo from Al Jazeera English News Channel. Just a question about the April 3rd EGAD meeting in Juba that was postponed to April 3rd. Are you hopeful that that can make some progress? And are you expecting all the foreign ministers to be there? What's your expectations there? Thank you. Did you hear me? Did you hear me?
That mission was due today, and at the last minute was cancelled at the request of the government. There was quite a distinct disappointment here in Juba that the mission was cancelled, because we put a lot of faith into this as a last opportunity to persuade the two principal players and others, and the wide range of stakeholders that we should emphasize, that there was still time to restore peace and a sense of balance to the country. They have now been offered the 3rd of April, which is next week. I think it's about 10 days' time. We would certainly want to encourage that mission, but we would want to continue to encourage others with influence or leverage to engage the parties in Juba and South Sudan generally.
Thank you, Mr. Haysom. One last question from me. You talked about the ethnic dimension. I wonder if you could elaborate on it. And do you see it at the same level as during the Civil War? Is it getting up there, getting worse? Thank you.
I would say that the current levels of ethnic tension aren't at the level they were in 2013 and 2016 yet. But both from this setting, but also from my experience in similar settings, once the spark starts, the conflict rapidly becomes ethnicized and ethnic. And we've begun to see elements of this in the proliferation of some really horrid hate speech circulating online. And I have no doubt that if the conflict were to erupt in full force, it would be characterized by a real attempt to mobilize people on the basis of ethnicity. And in the first instance, that would be Dinka versus Nuer. There have already been some really quite disturbing calls on different ethnicities to effect the murder or total elimination of rival ethnic groups. So we take the threat of the ethnic transformation of the conflict very seriously.
Okay, I see no further questions. So with that, I'll once more thank our guest, Mr. Haysom. I hope the next time we talk to each other, it's under better circumstances than this. But thanks very much for your briefing, and for all of you, wait some minutes, and we will have Stefan Dujerik give the other part of today's noon briefing.